Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and we're going to look at contractionary fiscal policy. So again, contractionary fiscal policy is a demand-side policy. It is an attempt, in this case, of the central government trying to influence aggregate demand. This is also referred to as a demand management policy. And the example that we're going to use is an economy entering an inflationary gap, and thus the central government wants to contract or pull back aggregate demand. Thus, it's called a contractionary fiscal policy. So, how can they do that? Contractionary fiscal policy is the central government influencing taxation or government spending to impact aggregate demand. So, if we want to pull AD back, the central government can increase income taxes or increase corporate taxes or increase wealth taxes. An increase in income tax would reduce consumption spending. An increase in corporate taxes would reduce investment spending. And an increase in wealth taxes could also reduce consumption spending. In addition, the government can decrease their government spending. And since government spending is a component of AD, it would have an immediate impact on real GDP. So those are the options available to the central government. Now, some historical examples of contractionary fiscal policy, we can look at the Bill Clinton administration. And while he was in office, we can see in this graph that he increased income taxes against the top 1% or the wealthiest 1% of Americans. And so we can see here that their tax rate under his administration went up. For the most part, those in the 81st to 99th percentile, the tax rate was relatively flat, no significant change. For the middle class, perhaps a slight decrease in their income taxes, leaving them more disposable income to spend into the economy. And for the lowest quintile, a reduction in their income tax to again provide more disposable income. So the increase in tax we can see here, this would be an aspect of contractionary fiscal policy. Now, the United States in this period was not necessarily in an inflationary gap. The economy was doing quite well. Under the Bill Clinton administration, he worked on expanding free trade agreements. So we can see from 1996 that there's this, a gradual increase in U.S. exports, and that continues. But under his administration, exports from the U.S. were increasing, and overall, the U.S. economy was doing, quite well. And if the economy is strong, that's usually a time, according to Keynesian economists, to increase taxation and reduce government spending to build a budget surplus. And so that's what we can see here, that the U.S. Since perhaps the late 1960s, 1970s, was maintaining a budget deficit where the central government was spending more than what they collected in taxes. But during the Bill Clinton administrative years, we see that year by year, the budget deficit is decreasing. And that's a result of the Clinton administration cutting government spending and increasing taxation on that top 1%. So that contractionary fiscal policy was able to reduce the budget deficit and generate a budget surplus. And Keynes economists would argue that when the economy is strong, that central government should do this so that they build that surplus so that the next time the economy goes into recession, they can spend into that recessionary gap. And so you can see that the surplus was generated, and then we had the 2001 September 11th attacks, and then we went back into a budget deficit. This is increased government spending, perhaps due to the military spending in the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and other aspects. And then this is the 2008 economic crisis, a significant increase in government spending to spend our way out of the recession. All right. So let's illustrate an economy going into an inflationary gap and being pulled back to full potential through a contractionary fiscal policy. So we'll assume, since aggregate demand is composed of consumption, investment, and government spending, and exports minus imports, perhaps there's too much consumption and investment spending perhaps too much government spending, perhaps household confidence and businesses' confidence is up. So aggregate demand is shifting outwards into an inflationary gap, okay, which we'll illustrate here in the Monetarist model. So from 81 to 82, and that leads to the economy entering an inflationary gap. So we'll label that Y inflation, real GDP increasing. And we see demand pull inflation, so the price level is rising from PL1 to PL2 at that point B. And the same thing with the Keynesian model. We're just illustrating the same thing. So 80 shifting out into an inflationary gap. And we're going to exaggerate that inflationary gap. 81 to 82. And we're going from point A, which we can barely see here, that's point A, to point B. There's demand pull inflation and excessive rise in the price level, right, from PL1 to PL2. So the economy has entered an inflationary gap, perhaps as a result of consumer confidence, business confidence, too much consumption, investment spending, perhaps even also too much government spending, and 80 shifting out to that inflationary gap. And we're getting demand pull inflation in the economy, along with an increase in real GDP. I should label that also here, a slight increase in real GDP on the Keynesian model from YP to Y inflation. So the central government then decides to intervene by applying contractionary fiscal policy, by increasing income taxes, by increasing corporate taxes, by increasing wealth taxes, and in addition, they decide to decrease government spending. So since 82 equals consumption spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus exports minus imports, the increased income tax will lead to a fall in consumption spending. The increased corporate taxes will lead to a fall in investment spending, and the decrease in government spending leading to a fall in government spending. So AD2 will shift back towards 81 at point A. The price level then falls, and real GDP thus decreases slightly. The same thing here. AD2 decreases, the price level falls, and real GDP decreases back to full potential. All right, so that's the overall idea. So let's go ahead and analyze this as we would for an IB exam. As can be seen, we have two graphs illustrating the creation of an inflationary gap, and we will close that inflationary gap with contractionary fiscal policy. In graph A, it is the monetarist model, and in graph B, the Keynesian model. Both models are measuring real GDP on the x-axis and the price level on the y-axis. In the monetarist model, we have a perfectly inelastic long-run aggregate supply curve labeled LRAS1. We have two downward aggregate demand curves labeled 81 and 82, and an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve labeled SRAS1. In the Keynesian model, we have a Keynesian aggregate supply curve with section 1 being horizontal due to the assumption that labor contracts, minimum wage legislation, worker or union resistance to wage cuts, and employer resistance to cutting wages to not lose worker morale provides kind of price floor for the price level. Then in section 2, we're achieving full potential, and in section 3, we are fully employing our factors of production. Thus, we do not get an increase in output, but just a rise in the price level if aggregate demand was to increase in section 3. So in graph A, where 81 equals SRAS1 equals LRS1 at point A, it provides an equilibrium price level at PL1 and real GDP at YP. We're at full potential and full employment. We're at the natural rate of unemployment, which is equal to structural, frictional, and seasonal unemployment. In the Keynesian model, where 81 equals the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, at point A, it provides a price level at PL1 and real GDP at YP or full potential. We're going to assume that Household confidence is up, business confidence is up, leading to increased consumption and investment spending. Perhaps there's also increased government spending, and that causes the aggregate demand curve in both graphs to increase from 81 to 82, creating a new equilibrium where 82 equals SRS1 at point B in graph A, leading to a rise in the price level from PL1 to PL2, and an increase in real GDP from YP to Y inflation. And due to the increased aggregate demand, firms begin to employ more labor to increase the quantity of their aggregate supply. Thus, unemployment falls below the natural rate. We should also note that there is demand pull in this economy as inflation is rising from PL1 to PL2. The same in the Keynesian model. The increase in aggregate demand from 81 to 82 causes firms to employ more labor and other factors of production to increase the quantity of aggregate supply from point A to point B, or from real GDP from YP to Y inflation. So again, unemployment is less than the natural rate. Economists see that the data is revealing an excessive increase in inflation, the demand pull inflation, and they also see that the unemployment data is showing that unemployment is less than the natural rate, which signals that the economy has entered an inflationary gap. Thus, they recommend that the central government utilize contractionary fiscal policy. So the central government begins to increase income taxes, increase corporate taxes, increase wealth taxes, and decrease government spending. That has the effect of reducing consumption, investment, and government spending. 82 shifts back towards 81 in both economic models. And as 82 shifts in, firms begin to fire excess resources like labor, since they're reducing the quantity of their aggregate supply. So unemployment rises back to the natural rate until the economy is back at full potential, where 81 equals SRS1 equals LRS1 in the monetarist model, and where 81 equals the Keynesian aggregate supply curve at point A. By using contractionary fiscal policy, the price level falls down from PL2 to PL1, and real GDP decreases from Y inflation back to YP. And that's it. That's the idea behind contractionary fiscal policy. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.